G'day there, this is Pedantic Gamer, and today I'm reviewing Painkiller Hell and Damnation. For those unaware, Painkiller Hell and Damnation is developed by the Farm 51, and is a remake of the original Painkiller, which was developed by People Can Fly, who have more recently developed Bulletstorm and are developing the latest Gears of War game. The game is currently out on Steam on PC, and a Mac version is to be released November 14th, with the PS3 and 360 release to come January 22nd. Now, the original Painkiller is an excellent FPS whose shortcoming was mostly its lack of story. Nonetheless, it featured an incredibly satisfying arena-style shooter experience that generally featured huge swarms of enemies to kill along with some massive bosses, all nicely pulled together with a suitable metal soundtrack. Sadly, the follow-ups to Painkiller were not handled by People Can Fly, and were almost universally seen as being horror games, and for very good reason, as they simply didn't understand that simply having the same gunplay and enemies didn't in of itself make the games equal, and featured small bland environments that made for very boring arenas to kill enemies in. So how does this remake fare? Well, I can thankfully say for the first time since the original Painkiller, that Painkiller thankfully doesn't suck anymore. For the most part, this is Painkiller, or at least part of it, made with better textures, lighting effects, character models, and some slight tweaks and changes to enemy variety. You may have noticed that I said it is like Painkiller, or at least parts of it, which may strike you as odd given that it is a remake, which I will address very shortly. Now, the intro cutscene has been revamped and doesn't drag on like it did in the original, which is an extremely nice change given that the story is essentially non-existent. One of the probably least notable changes is how the first boss can be seen in the background of the first level, and this trend continues throughout and is incredibly satisfying to get glimpses of the mess of enemies you will soon be fighting. Now, as for the multiplayer, I can't comment as I have played the survival mode on my own, but have yet to find anyone else online, or when I have found matches, I haven't been able to connect. I don't know if this is a server or game issue preventing me from seeing anyone else online, or connecting to anyone else online, but nonetheless there does seem to be some promise with the online component, presuming I can actually find people to play with and actually connect to those people. This is unfortunate as it's launched with essentially a DOA multiplayer, and it probably doesn't have a large enough fan base to ever actually come back from a DOA multiplayer. Now, one area that I am interested in the multiplayer is the campaign can now be played co-op. I sadly haven't been able to check that out either, as just like the competitive multiplayer, it seems to be broken and I can't connect to anyone at this point in time. If this does change, I will update this review or do another video on this matter and actually talk about the multiplayer, but as it is, I have to review it as it is at the moment, and at the moment the multiplayer does not work for me. Now, it is entirely plausible that this issue is entirely computer related, but I have now tried it on two different PCs at two different locations and have had the same issue at both times, which does suggest that it is, at least to some extent, a game issue. One area I am disappointed in is that there have been no improvements to the enemy artificial intelligence or AI, as I found myself trying to find the last enemy in one area on several occasions just to find the enemy stuck behind the wall, trying to walk through it to where I was. Also, I have to note that whilst in the beta you could change your FOV in the console, you now have to change it outside of the game. This isn't a huge issue, but it is an annoyance that they changed from the beta, as it makes finding the FOV you want requiring closing and opening the game possibly several times, and is essentially just an annoying and unnecessary change. Ultimately, Painkiller Hell and Damnation is a fun experience, but it suffers from one rather massive flaw, being that Painkiller Hell and Damnation is a remake of a game that can frequently be had for $2.50, and Painkiller Hell and Damnation has significantly less content than that game. What do I mean by significantly less content? Well, Painkiller Hell and Damnation only has 14 levels, whereas the Painkiller Black Edition has nearly twice that. The problem is this release costs notably more than the Black Edition of Painkiller, and the only real improvement is from a visual perspective. To me, even if the prices were the same, I would still prefer the Black Edition, as the benefits of the larger amount of content far outweigh the benefits of some better graphics. Even when you don't take that into account, $20 for a 4-hour single-player campaign and a multiplayer that seems to be DOA is not exactly great value for money. Furthermore, some of the additions to the game, such as the new Soul Collector weapon, are to the detriment of the game, as it is so overpowered and ammo is so plentiful, there's very little reason to use anything else, which makes the rather awesome weapons you otherwise have available somewhat redundant despite being extremely satisfying to use. Ultimately, if you don't have Painkiller Black Edition, I would strongly urge you to buy that instead. If you already own Painkiller Black Edition, you probably already own this. If you haven't though, I would still recommend waiting for Painkiller Hell and Damnation to go on sale, as its asking price of $20, whilst arguably low for a new release game of this quality, is simply too much given the content related issue when compared with Painkiller Black Edition. That is me more or less done for this video. I didn't go into too much depth in terms of how the game actually plays, as it is essentially unchanged from the original, which is now 8 years old, and there is plentiful information regarding that area already. Although I will add that the mouse acceleration was on by default, and even when I turned this off, the game still felt like it controlled notably worse than the original Painkiller Black Edition. I'm not sure why or what else is going on there, but there does seem to be something else there. I'm guessing possibly mouse smoothing, although I'm not sure about that at this point in time. I really must ask though, why are such things turned on by default on a PC release when people are going to be using a keyboard and mouse? It simply makes no sense. Now, if I do get the multiplayer working, I shall be sure to post some further thoughts. I however doubt the multiplayer will ever be all that active, as how many games launch with a dead multiplayer that later become active? Not that many from what I've seen, especially in this style of game. Anyway, this is Pedantic Gamer. I do hope you've enjoyed this review. If you have, please consider liking and subbing, as it does really help me out. Anyway, I hope to see you next time.